We're going to have I hope, a conversation here this afternoon. The general subject is fire department customer service, but we can certainly talk about that. That gives us the capability to talk about just about anything that happens in a fire department. So please don't be bashful or shy about sharing any thoughts that you have, any experiences. If as we go through this, and I would certainly say this to everyone, both here and the folks who are looking in on this, if there is something that doesn't make sense or it's out of balance or you disagree with it or you want to talk about it more, please don't be, again, shy about just hollering, and we will stop and do whatever we need to kind of hook up to whatever you need in the process. I have been trudging around the country probably for, the last 15 years, and have had the pleasure to talk to a lot of firefighters about the things that we do in the sense of connecting to the folks that we deliver service to and with and around, and sort of what sort of completes our mission if you sort of think about what we're in business to do. And it's been an interesting project, I think, for the fire service. And I think that the conversation that it has generated has changed some of the things in our service in kind of a real easygoing kind of way. I don't think that it was a change that really took a lot of effort, because it really hooked up, I think, to the reason that most of us became firefighters and the socialization that we had as we got into the service and then got going in the service. So I think it was a pretty natural act in the process, as opposed to a lot of the other changes I think that all of us have been involved in that were sometimes got to be pretty strenuous, if you sort of think of us sort of extending our imaginations and the kinds of things that we had to sort of do new, different, better kinds of things. But I think that this one, the customer part of it, was really pretty easy going when you sort of look back on it. We got a small group here, and so we can certainly do this. Why don't we just go around and introduce ourselves and kind of who you are, where you came from, where you went to camp this summer, anything interesting. We'll just start over here with my friend.
I'm Mike Keenan. Same as him. I'm Boone County Fire Protection District here in Columbia. I just recently graduated from their recruit program. Got my Fire 1 and 2. And just recently graduated from the EMTB class and took my national registry test in EMT. And so I'm pretty new to the service, and like him as well, I'm honored to get to meet you today. Thanks.
Very good. So you're just getting going then? Yeah. Well, good. Well, welcome to the fire service. We'll be talking to you today.
My name is Jesse Hackenworth. I'm a firefighter with the Winsville Fire Protection District. I've been there for about 7 years now. I signed up to take the class that you were going to teach last year, and I think for some unforeseen reason, some plans got changed up here, and ended up being a great class with Bobby Holton. And so I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say today.
Okay, good. Thanks.
My name is Brett Olnby. I'm with the Warrenton Fire Protection District. I work full-time with them. I've been in the service about 5 years now, so really like it.
Good. Where's your department located?
Actually, like 15 minutes away from his department. We're about 60 miles west of St. Louis.
Okay, very good.
So
in the St. Louis metro area then?
Close.
Okay, good. Thanks.
My name is Jason Bowman. I'm with Bella Vista, Arkansas Fire Department, and I've been in the fire service for about 14 years now. And was interested, was suggested by my chief to come visit and see your show. He'd been in and seen it once before.
Okay, well, thank you.
My name is Josh Card. I'm a firefighter with Columbia Fire Department right here in town. I've been in the fire service for about 13, going on 14 years now. With a couple other departments. I did some contract firefighting and then some wildland, and I've been with Columbia for 2 years now.
Good.
Name's Tim Bach, also with Columbia Fire Department. Been an engineer for 7 years, been on the department for 10 years. We have your customer service book in all our libraries at our stations, and happened to read it over a couple days, and it truly changed the way I look at customer service, so thought this class would kind of help expand on that.
Good. Thank you for reading the book.
My name's Walt Goodman. Been a firefighter with Josh here for, I guess, about 11 years, and I've also been a firefighter with these guys at Columbia Fire Department. I'm in my second year now, and thank you for making the trip back over here.
Yeah, we'll keep going here.
Thank you. My name is Kevin Smith. I'm a training officer with the Hannibal Rural Fire Protection District. Been involved with them for about 16 years now. Last 13 years worked part-time with Marion County Ambulance District as an EMTB. And for the last 29 years worked with a chemical company, now known as BASF in the Hannibal area. Do emergency response with them also.
Jason Watson, New Virginia, Iowa Fire Department. Been on there for 5 years. Paramedic also. That's about it.
Kelly Ash is Springfield Fire Department, Springfield, Missouri Fire Department. We truck captain there. Been on the service for about 10 and a half years, so I was kind of a latecomer in fire service, but feel blessed to be able to do something I really enjoy doing. And we have a department of about 210 firefighters, 12 stations.
Hang on just a second, Kelly. You're a truck captain?
Yeah.
Okay.
We call them truck captains, lieutenants. I know there's different terminology. But
Is that a truck company?
truck company captain.
Okay, a ladder
Yes.
company?
Yes,
Okay,
ladder
very
company.
Good, very good, very good.
Doug Holdmeyer with the Washington Volunteer Fire Company. I've been with them for about 2 years now.
Okay, thanks.
My name is Bob Tucker. I've been in the fire service approximately 18 years. I wanted to see you speak for a long time, and I've had the opportunity this year, so that's why I'm here. Really,
Where do you work?
I work in Cedar Hill. It's in the St. Louis metropolitan area, just south of St. Louis.
Okay, good, thanks.
My name is Mick Fisher. I also work with Cedar Hill at this knucklehead, and I've been there about 14 years. And like he said, look forward to coming to see you speak.
Isn't there a section in St. Louis called The Hill?
Yeah, it's not us.
Not you guys, yeah. It's where all the Italian restaurants are. I've been there a couple times. Well, thank you all for introducing yourselves. We have a good cross-section of folks here. What brings a group like this together to visit about customer service? Why would a seemingly sober group of people stumble into a classroom here to visit about customer stuff? What's the deal? I'm sorry? Okay, to find a better way to help our customers. That's a pretty important thing to do, isn't it?
I was kind of wondering how we can break through some of the old culture of we're set in our ways of we're the fire service, we're unique, and stand off, and try to get everybody on the same playing field within the fire service to recognize that the customer / taxpayer, those are the ones we have to win their trust and admiration.
Thank you for saying that, and no disrespect meant. In fact, I'm pretty much connected to the old school. When we say the old school, what's cooking there? If you look at sort of the tradition of our service, and the way we're talking about it here. Sure, yeah, no.
I'm thinking of some of the guys.
You have the mic.
Some of the guys locally, a few years back, some of the local departments went to medical first responder programs. Guys who'd been in the service for 15, 20 years, I never signed on for that kind of stuff. I don't want to go out and deal with the pukes and the messes. And rather kicking and screaming, they still had to come into that kind of service. And some are grandfathered in. Newer guys, younger fellows, as they come on, they understand, accept it a lot more readily than the older guys. But we still have some of that mindset that how we're going to try to change some of those guys.
See, so what's going on there? Perfect example, too. I didn't sign on for that, right? Am I saying that?
Yes.
Yeah. What did they sign on for?
Most of those guys, the old guys that I talk with back home, I got on for the firefighting. I got on for the pension. I hear that occasionally. And maybe the occasional wreck and so forth. we'll do the cut jobs, but I didn't get in there to go in and work with the ambulance, to work as a medic, to work as an EMT or anything like that.
So we had a generation of firefighters that, let me keep using the term, that signed on to do firefighting. And they did too. I don't mean that critically of them at all. That's my generation. When I came into the fire service, essentially all we did was fire control. So we sat in an old beat up fire station downtown and waited for them to ring the bell. We would salivate, slide the pole, and we would go out and put water on it. I mean, life was really pretty simple, and it was a great time in the fire service. What happened to that? Anybody? Yeah, we'll get the mic to you here. Somebody. Right, yeah. What happened?
This might be a little silly, but I believe the show Rescue, didn't that change it drastically? The TV show Rescue or whatever, Emergency?
Emergency, yeah.
There we go. That TV show,
didn't it?
didn't
Was
it?
about the president.
All right.
Yeah, nobody wanted to run for president after, well, it's another story.
But I believe that TV show really influenced people in probably a lot smaller communities outside of the major populated areas that they believe they should have an EMS system. And then obviously, and that became part of the firehouse, hazmat, everything. It just evolved. You had to be more than just firefighters. Fires are going down. You have to justify your means of being there.
Yeah, sure.
Kind of to tie in with what he said, another issue that's come up is because of public education, because of new building codes, and especially more so in the recent years, the amount of actual fires that we've seen have been dropping, and more you've seen other departments to adopt a higher call volume to justify, what they're spending for their fire department. We'll take on additional tasks. We'll do additional things to show that the people are getting what they're paying for.
Sure. But it's odd, and we tend to say that too, and I think it's true. If you look at building codes and all the safety stuff that's occurred probably in the last 15 years, it's probably changed the fire profile a little bit, but there are still over 1,000 single-family residence fires a day in America. So America is still burning, if you may. And we're still called upon, obviously, to go and do that traditional role that we have as far as firefighting. But see, it's interesting to look at the service in the sense that you described it very well, and you all have added on to it, is that we had a very traditional service where we kind of got to define what that service was. It was, in a way, it was almost like it was a secret service. Not that we wanted to keep it that way, but it was a very internal service. I think the point about Roy and Johnny, when you start looking at things like the TV program Emergency, which really changed a lot of people's perception and sort of understanding about EMS. In other words, they got to watch it dramatized in a way that was entertaining so they could watch it for an hour. But I can remember that, and I was certainly involved in this system as it was being developed during that period. So, again, an interesting dynamic where there's an outside influence that most of us would never even have thought about. In other words, there's going to be this Jack Webb presentation on EMS. Now, it was very idealized. On Emergency, nobody ever died. And they had to, because it had to be entertaining and it had to sustain itself and so on. But it was interesting to see our service as it became more exposed, if you may. In other words, that we sort of became a lot more visible to let me say, to the customers. So it changed not only the connection with the customers, as far as maybe them being at least a little bit more familiar with us, but it also changed their expectation as far as service is concerned. Now, in that process, and again, I lived through that just like we all did, is we had an existing generation of firefighters who had come in, and the system had made them a different deal. In other words, I became a firefighter in 1958. What we did, and I said it before, is we sat in a fire station and waited for a fire. I mean, it was almost that straightforward. What were those fires like, if you sort of think about it? There were structural fires. A lot of them were. We had a lot. I think that's one of the changes. We had a lot more large fires then. you sort of look back on it. Yeah, the size of them, I think, was a difference because there weren't as many built-in kinds of things to keep them from getting large as there is today, for example. But they were pretty straightforward situations. They were straight fires. We were not protected very well personally. So it was very, if you may, very robust in the process. It was pretty simple too. It was before the incident command system development had occurred. So they were pretty, there was a lot of free enterprise, if you may. We didn't call it that, but companies operated a lot more independently. It was, in a way, it was a lot more fun. And I've had a lot of firefighters during my career say, you took the fun out of this. Well, and that it was pretty insulated from the people who received that service. In other words, we didn't have a lot of contact with the people who came with these buildings. And that's sort of the way we regarded them, is that we sort of had the idea that people came with buildings. And we would rescue them, would kill ourselves rescuing them. We had a great relationship with them. It wasn't like there was a problem with them. But really what we delivered, and I certainly would put myself in that same way, let me say, is that we mostly delivered service to buildings that were on fire. So it was the building and the fire. In other words, as I went through the training to be a firefighter and then on beyond that, what we studied is we studied sort of in it, let me summarize it, we studied fire behavior, and we studied the way structures behave as far as, in other words, the way they react when they're burning. We still do, and that's critical to us. I think we'll do that forever. But we did not really study very much or spend much time looking at human behavior or the dynamics of the people who were part of that building. They either owned it or occupied it or some way were, at least at that moment when there was a fire, were connected. So it became, if you may, a lot more complex as we've sort of evolved here in the last, 25 or 30 years. Sort of in the customer stuff, when you start looking at a full range of the ways customers are packaged up for us. And one of them is the generational kind of thing. I wonder, does anybody in here have an emergency dispatch system where the customers can text message an alarm in? I don't think so. Should we? Are there a whole group of people that would be more comfortable text messaging it than dialing 911? I think so, yeah. So I wonder, somebody said TLC, talk the language of the customer. That might be an opportunity for us, is to say, here's simply the way young people now today do a lot of their communicating is they do it with text messaging in the process. I know I read a thing in the paper there in Phoenix in the wintertime that there were some schools that were not allowing kids to wear I guess they call them hoodies that have the hand warmers, because they could text message in the hand warmers. Now, I couldn't text message if you held a gun to my head and there's some kid blindfolded talking to another kid who's blindfolded. So it's interesting to be almost completely illiterate at this stage of your life in the process. How do we stay connected to this? In other words, how do you deal with an environment that is really changing dramatically, and particularly now, if you look at it, there's a lot of really tough changes going on now. The economic kinds of things, the bailouts, the unemployment, there's all the foreclosures. You're going to see that change in the fire problem. But just all the changes in general that are going on with our customers and the shift in their situation, their personal situations, and then the business with our workforce that sometimes has the inclination, at least, to say, you didn't hire me to do that. I didn't hire on to do that. And I'm wondering, how do you deal with that? You're a training. You said you were a training officer. Obviously, training is a huge part of that. So, how do you manage that? I guess
we're fortunate. We have a good cross section of life in our department for about 20 guys. I've got guys in their 50s, and I've got youngsters that are just in their early 20s. And what I try to do is encourage the young guys to step up and take a role and kind of set an example. It puts them on a spot, but it throws them into the limelight early on, and they can influence sometimes the older guys. And sometimes you have to kind of bump and guide a little bit with the older fellas to open up and be receptive, because even though they're the rookies or the new recruits, well, they have something they can teach us, as you've alluded to with the technology of today. Sure. They come in with ideas and the different generational expectations, and we can't mold them completely to us. Likewise, they can't mold us completely to them. But somewhere in there, hopefully we can find a happy medium.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the young people today, and we hear this a lot just in our conversations in the fire service, the kind of the sort of the instinctive response that young people have just simply to asking the question, why? In other words, and sometimes if you look at that, the effect that has in sort of a traditional organization, in other words, that where we still have a little bit of the old time business of that you come in and you ride backwards and you keep your mouth shut and you earn your keep, and it's a rite of passage, and you don't speak up for a certain period of time, and you stand back in the shadows and you listen to the old guys sitting around the campfire telling organizational war stories, and that's always going to go on, and I'm not being critical of that. But now we got a generation of young people who are really our personnel resource. In other words, they're our human resources now. If you look at the age of firefighters when we recruit them, is that these are, and let me say it affectionately, these are the kids that are coming into the fire service now. Well, we raised those kids in a way that we said, if you don't understand something that's going on, is ask. Just ask why. If you don't know what's going on, just ask somebody why, and they'll tell you. I think they're very comfortable doing that. Well, I think back to my generation with my folks, great folks, but kind of first generation parents who said when I got a job, they said, keep your eyes open, your mouth shut. It isn't your boss's job to tell you everything that's going on. And if you're smart enough, you'll figure it out. Well, today, see, I can't imagine saying that to anybody. But to kids, as I said, what you'd tell them today is, if you don't know, if you wonder about something, just ask about it. Now, it's also connected to that, is that you start to hear in the discussion about that how much more effective everyone is if they know why. All of us. I think that for all of us, and we have probably 2 or 3 generations in here, and I would probably represent the oldest, I'm certainly a lot more effective if somebody will tell me why. And I ask why a lot, really. And if you hear it, and we say, in our service, we tend to say, well, there's some situations where we really don't have time to explain why. And I agree with that. In other words, if we're doing hazard zone management, we're obviously working in a time and a place and a situation where time is pretty compressed. In other words, we're not going to give the Gettysburg Address in telling somebody why something's going on or something that needs to be done. But even there, if you sort of study it and you listen to it and you do some simulated representation of it, and then you talk to the players in it, and they will say, young people, I've done some tactics stuff after I retired with some young firefighters, and they'll say that, I guess talking to me is like talking to their grandfather, but they'll say that if we have an IC that will give us an order, and at the end of that order, if they'll just quickly tell us why. In other words, Engine 1, I want you to take a tack line in the doors on side C. I want you to keep the fire in the kitchen. It's just off my head. They say we're 5 times more effective if they'll just spend that little bit of time explaining why to us. So even there, it's an interesting place for us, and probably a fairly critical place to have. This is going to sound kind of funny to say that incident commanders, if they will treat the people who work for them like customers, and they'll spend another second or 2 saying why, amazing how that hooks up to a lot more effective outcome as far as execution is concerned. Now, we normally would not think of ICs thinking of people, companies, or whoever's working for them as customers. By the same token, if the firefighters thought of the IC as a customer, and that IC is, let's say, is in a stationary remote position someplace, they would tell that IC in the same way, a little bit more about what was going on to expand their understanding so they could connect more effectively. By the same token, is if we will do the same thing to customers, we will hear continually from customers how much they appreciated you all explaining to them what was going on, the situation, how you were treating them, what was the future of the sort of the situation they were in. And what a lot of them will the way they sort of say it, and if you get a chance, for example, to do focus groups or deal with those customers sort of interpersonally, they will say it was enormously respectful for that firefighter to explain to me what was going on. So it's sort of interesting to look at some of this generational stuff and to say, well, I didn't hire on to do that. See, and I think and that's, I don't mean to belabor it here this afternoon, but that's a big deal, because let me ask you all, is there going to be more or less of that in the next decade? Pick a number. Are we going to change more or less as a fire service in the next decade than we have, let's say, in the decade before that? Yeah, more. So what does that mean in the sense of I didn't hire on to do that?
Probably hear less of that, hopefully.
So yeah, so if I want to get stuck where I am right now, there's going to be plenty of opportunities for me to react to that and to represent that and to obstruct, if you may, other things that are going on that might take us to where we're going. Maybe we need to go there, but we're probably going to go there whether I obstruct it or not. In other words, we didn't get into any less EMS because of the group of firefighters that said I didn't hire on to do that. And I come from a pretty good sized system. I mean, so there was a period in the fire department that I worked in that there was 250 firefighters that was saying I didn't sign on to do this, right in the middle of the beginning of EMS changes. And I probably, in my career as a fire chief, lived through 4 or 5 of those adventures of major changes of saying, I mean, as crazy looking back on it as firefighters saying, I didn't sign on to use self-contained breathing apparatus. Well, I mean, it was an experience to be involved in a system where we were going through all the normal changes that everybody else went through. I mean, we didn't do anything different there. But to say with a pretty good-sized group of people, very traditional group of people, in a lot of ways, is that somehow you have got to convert the existing workforce that you have to what's going on currently and make sense out of it. Now, I don't think that anybody on the assembly line would say, you know, I only build 2008 F-100 pickups. I don't build 09s. Well, I don't think there's a big, long future for that person. I mean, just to use that as a silly example. In other words, every year on that assembly line, they're going to build the car of that year. And I guess we sort of have the same assembly line if you look at it. But I don't think that we really have talked very much as a service about how do we bring those people along, if you may. In other words, no criticism of the people either. Now, I heard a lot of firefighters who said, well, I didn't sign on to do that. That ended up doing a great job at doing that when it was all said and done. So some of it is just stuff you do around the kitchen table, the virtual kitchen table. Yeah, hop in. Yeah. Thoughts? Yeah.
Human nature, like I said, I've been working for 30 years in the chemical industry, and in the last 10 to 15 years have been rather dynamic, is a good way to put it. We're still making the same amounts of products, inventories and stuff with about half the people, just the economics of the world. And I think fire, EMS, rescue services in general, we're getting caught up in the economic realities of life, and we're veering more towards that all hazards approach. And generally when people have a problem and they can't neatly fit it into an area, who do they call? Yeah. Most generally fire department.
Why do they call us?
We usually have trouble saying no.
Pardon?
We usually have trouble saying no.
Yeah, okay, that's a great response too, yeah. We do not screen calls much, really. If you sort of look at the way that we deploy, they ask you we ask 2 questions. Where are you and what's the matter? and we're out the door. You hope it's all the way up, particularly if they say it's a fire. So we are enormously accessible. Because it's easy to get us, if you may. It's one of the strengths of the service. You've got a 3-digit number, bingo, 911, police, fire, EMS, my kitchen's burning, fire, where are you, what's the matter? We're the easiest group to get. And we're also the easiest group to get rid of at the end of that event. We've laughed and cried about that as far as government. We said, we're the ideal form of government because, again, we're easy to get, and when we're finished, we're easy to get rid of. We go back to what we were doing before. Some people have said one of the two problems in government is you can't get us in the beginning, and then you can't get rid of us at the end of it. So that's another dynamic of it. But see, it's interesting when you look at the accessibility that we have, and that there's, and another answer is not only do we not say no, but at 3 o'clock in the morning, there isn't anybody else to call. I mean, to say, not only anybody else to call, but a lot of what we do today, if you look at the way our medical services have evolved, is essentially, if you look at it, it's really social service. It's mental health. We deliver as much mental health service and support as we do anything else. Well, part of the problem is that the mental health agencies all close at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And I don't mean that critically for them. That's the way they schedule and they arrange and package up their time. So we don't close at 5 o'clock, to put it mildly. So we have a very, very special position, if you may, in the community, in the sense of how we are positioned, if you may, to deliver that service. So it's a blessing, and sometimes it's a curse, because there's a lot of times when people are having an emergency that we can effectively and successfully intervene in, that we do just that. In other words, we respond quick, we solve their problem, we take care of them and whatever's going on. But there's other times when we have, see, we're an interesting group when you start talking about frequent flyers. If you owned a business, you said that you own a business. Do you like frequent flyers? Absolutely. In other words, God, he's going to buy another siren from me. That's a good day, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. You would want that. Yeah. How do we feel about frequent flyers? See, my friend is going. Yeah. What does that mean? Yeah. Yeah.
We don't seem to enjoy that as much, especially with the same house over and over again, the same problem. We want to fix the problem.
Yeah.
And I guess some of that has to do with just getting out of bed in the middle of the night, or that's just the right thing to do. You're there to fix problems. That's what they teach you. They want to fix the problem.
Yeah. And it presupposes that the person has kind of a normal relationship to their problem too. I don't mean that sarcastically for the person who called, but it's interesting to see where this poor man is having more grief with his speakers.
Let's leave the on-off button alone.
Perfect. Okay. Did you tape it? You have dealt with firefighters before. We can screw up a small steel ball, break it, and then take 2 days off.
If I may,
There you
kind of to go along with something that he said, one of the things that I've noticed is, especially after you've been doing this for a while, there becomes a little bit of complacency with these people that we would refer to as frequent flyers. At 3 o'clock in the morning, you hear the same address dispatch that you've been to 3 days in a row, and you hear the sigh when you roll over and decide whether or not you want to just squelch the pager and not get up, or if you actually want to get out of bed. And I think complacency has a lot to do with some of the problems that we have in the service in general, but especially when it comes to customer service, because as you mentioned, a lot of the folks that have been doing this a long time, they're set in their ways, and they don't really see a need to change how they've done it, because they've done it the same way for so long and it's always worked. But complacency is one of those things that in the right situation will kill us, and I don't believe that there's room for it, but it's hard to convince other people of that sometimes.
Yeah, and you said that perfect too. Is how do you manage that? Because I never heard. There's a lot of new stuff. The whole term of frequent flyers is what, maybe a decade long. No, it's not a traditional term in the fire service. And it had to do with it came with, I said it had to do with the development of our EMS system. And the challenge for us, I think, is that EMS, when we started EMS, and I was there, I was kind of the main change agent in our system just because of the job I had at the time. When we got into EMS, the E stood for emergency. It was emergency medical service. So people who were attracted to it that we recruited to be the vanguards of that, when they went on a call, there was somebody was having a medical emergency. Well, if you look at what's happened since there in the last 30 years, huge changes in the medical system, managed health care or mangled health care, all the confusion in the thing. So now what the E stands for, there's no clarity in the medical system. You all firefighters here and the ones listening and watching are more advocates for that customer as much as anything else, and as much as them actually going out and delivering definitive treatment, not that you can't do that and don't do that. So the shift now is that the E in emergency, the EMS is now everything. So we deliver as much mental health, if you may. In other words, you all are very much mental health workers, if you look at what you deliver. And it is a spiritual calling now. And I know it's easier for me to say that than it is for you to believe that at 3 o'clock in the morning when this is the 12th time you've gone to see O Virginia at 521 Elm Street. I mean, everybody has it memorized. Now, to some extent, I think that our systems and our departments need to provide more support to fire companies to say, we need to process this person through some social service, because they don't need engine 3 at 3 o'clock in the morning. They may need Meals on Wheels, or they may need medication or something else at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. But at that moment, engine 3 is going to get to go on Elm Street. But it's been a critical shift, I think, to see how the EMS system has filled in and sort of has supported and compensated a lot of the changes just in the way that people are taken care of just in our country. Now you wonder what would have happened if we hadn't got into EMS when we did. Who knows, because we did, and now it's 80% of the activity of most of our departments. But it has to be one of the most dramatic changes in the productivity of any public sector organization. When you look at the 30-year experience of the American Fire Service taking on EMS without very much additional resource. I mean, that was another thing. And they didn't give us a bunch of resources when we got into EMS. We took the existing workforce, we trained them, we used the equipment that we had and have, and we started delivering EMS. I mean, that was an enormously righteous thing for a service to do. Now you look at the impact of that in the last 30 years from a customer service standpoint, has been you couldn't even calculate it. So again, it's something I think we ought to celebrate. But again, it's tough to celebrate it at 3:30 in the morning when you have to get up and go do what you've done 8 or 10 times before. It may be the test more than anything else of what you said, is that are we going to be complacent or are we going to be connected? People, once in a while somebody will ask me, what are the biggest problems in the fire service? And my response is the welfare of firefighters. In other words, the injury and death of firefighters operationally and occupationally is the first. That's a horrible. We lost 114 firefighters last year. It's an amazing, horrible problem for us. I said the second problem is urban EMS after 11 o'clock at night. If you look at that, urban EMS systems after midnight-ish until waking up time, is that you are truly the everything response service. And that is an incredible challenge to the people that have to do that. And it's a piece of the it's as critical a piece of the customer service process as any other single thing, is that I don't think that in most fire departments that we have developed management systems that really accommodate and understand and support what fire companies are doing sometimes during that period of time. And the function that they provide in the community is absolutely critical when you look at it. Again, it is probably an example among the finest examples of government, if you look at what government should do. And I don't mean to make this a big political science thing, but it really is too. You all do that, and I commend you for that too. I mean, you all are street firefighters, and I think that's a terrific talent that you have, and it's a terrific effort that you extend in your communities. And I know it, when I was a fire chief here a few years ago, I was a fire chief for a long time. I always tried, and I probably should have done better, to extend, I think, that first of all, just personally, my gratitude and admiration for what firefighters do and did in general, but certainly for that one. In other words, for that one place where you deliver service, as special as that is. So again, I didn't mean to go off on your example there. I didn't sign up to do this. But I think that there's a challenge for us. Again, you all said it kind of quickly and instinctively. If you look at what's ahead of us in the next 5 years or 10 years, I don't think in some ways we can't even imagine it. But I guess part of the challenge is how do bosses sort of package up that workforce to take that trip? In other words, that there can be a lot of wasted effort when we're sitting around sort of entertaining ourselves saying that I didn't sign up to do that. I noticed in my travels that pretty much everything that a fire department does is interesting and exciting to most people. And if we will report on just that, in other words, the part of what we do, emergency operations, service delivery, preparation, a lot of the internal kinds of things that most people, even the ones that aren't interested, will pay attention to it just because somebody said there's a lot of zip in it. In other words, with what we do. And the guy that gave me that advice said, don't discount the power of that zip, because you all can demonstrate, in other words, you reflect that in what you do. So we took a very active approach to informing Mr. and Mrs. Smith the things that we did. We explained to them how and why and the details and the dynamics of how we did that. We had a program where we would do certified media academies, where we brought in 25 or 30 media people for a week at our training academy. And they would actually go through kind of a mini recruit program. Well, when they graduated from that, we called them and we designated them as, called them certified fire journalists. For the shooters, we gave them, TV shooters, we gave them a set of turnouts and allowed them to go any place in the warm zone. But just generally, we probably raised the intelligence level of the media in Phoenix 500% by virtue of training them and explaining to them the things that we did. You could see that reflected in not only the way they reported, but also in the interest in the community in what we were doing. So we sort of leveraged, I think, if you may, this sounds kind of funny, the excitement of what we do by presenting it to the community, not in a self-serving or a sensational kind of way. I mean, that wouldn't make any sense. But just to say, here substantively is a description of the way that we're delivering service to this situation. And I noticed that it created, I think, to your question, a lot fewer people who didn't want to be educated. In other words, they were kind of attracted to what they saw, so it created more interest in them learning more, if you may. But I think that's up to us, is that if you talk to the people who study it, they'll say if you operate, or if you're involved in kind of an esoteric internal service, if you don't educate the media, you'll never get your message out to the public. So you have got to go to the effort and make the investment to say, we will explain to you, we'll take the time and the energy and the expense of educating you in what we do. Now the media is a lot like we are. They're active, they're smart, they're energetic, they misbehave, like they're mischievous if you deal with them, because they got a lot of energy. In other words, it's an energetic service. Now, to a lot of people, that's an aggravation, because it could go to the paparazzi, where that has its own special kind of thing with celebrities. But, you know, they're going to jump over the fence to get the picture of that fire. So what we did is that we put a ladder up for them, and we gave them a set of turnouts, and we told them, don't get hurt, and here's where you can go. Because they're like we are. It's like telling a firefighter, if you want to get firefighters involved in something, just say keep out. Because that's the kind of people firefighters are. I mean, hallelujah, I'm glad they are. But I think there is that how do you hook people who really don't want to be educated, and we educate them? Is that if we start to deal internally with this same sort of an idea, I think it reduces the I didn't sign up for this. In other words, that you're a training officer, that you can train firefighters to do just about anything. The most trainable group of people on the planet. You can train them to understand just about anything too. And I've seen this in the customer service sort of package. And I know I lived through this myself, because it was more educational to me than it was probably to anybody else in the system. But just for us to somehow put ourselves in that customer's position. In other words, to say that when Mrs. Smith was having a kitchen fire, she basically was not having an administrative experience. Duh, if you sort of do the kid thing. So for us, and I would let me just use myself as a bad example of so many things, is that I was trained like many of you, was trained in a very technical kind of way. I was attracted to the fire service before I even became a firefighter, based on what we would call mostly firefighting tactics and strategy. It's part of the service that I was the most interested in. It's a part of the service that honestly, in a lot of ways, I'm still the most interested in. But I was, again, I was lucky because I worked in a system where there was a lot of training, and they would send you to training, and I went all over being trained like all the rest of us did. I mean, I was no different than any other Phoenix firefighter. But I had a lot of really technical, tactical education, if you may. For me, that fit the things I was interested in and what I was doing and so on. So as I went through the promotional process, I got into a position just like a lot of other people did. It wasn't anything that special, but I got in a place where I would receive mostly letters from customers who had received service from us. Most of the time it was EMS, it was fire control in the beginning, but then it got balanced with EMS. So there was a lot of EMS response that we got. But I read those letters from Mrs. Smith for years and years. And when I look back on it, and I kind of laugh about it now, let me ask you all, Mrs. Smith has, let me just use a classic thing. Mrs. Smith has a fire in her kitchen. She calls us, we respond, we handle the fire, we do the normal routine, and then we disengage and demob and all that. Well, she goes through the recovery process, and one of the things that she thinks about is, she said, those firefighters were so positive with me that I'm going to write a letter and thank them for what they did. Most of the letters that you get in a fire department are mostly very, very positive. if you get some negative response, if they write a letter, it's probably a big deal. But most of the time they will call you if they have, in other words, they telephone complaints, if you may. So most of the letters, almost 100% of the letters that I wrote were very, very positive. So she's thinking back on the experience that she had when she had her fire. Not complicated. And in those letters, and again, I read a ton of those letters, she said basically three things in the letter. What did she remember first when she thinks back on it? What'd she remember first?
Probably how quickly you got there.
Yeah, absolutely. How quickly we got there. Why would you remember that? Why would that sort of hop in there pretty quickly?
Her house is burning?
Yeah, her house is burning. It's urgent. Yeah, she has a high willingness for us to get there and go to work on putting the fire out. In other words, getting the fire out of her house in the process. If you look at her normal current education, or experience rather, maybe education too, in receiving service, if your washing machine, and I'm not criticizing the appliance industry, but if your washing machine you get up in the morning, your washing machine thinks it's a toaster. So you call a washing machine, the Maytag repairman. When will they be there?
Maybe
in a couple days when? Next Wednesday between what?
8 and 5.
8 in the morning and 11:30 at night. Sometime in there they're going to fix your washer. And that's just the way they run that industry. I'm not being critical of them. So her normal sort of recollection and connection to the service industry is if you need service, it's going to take a day or two to get it. Generally, do you think service is getting better or worse in our country? Yeah, but the people who study it would say it's getting worse almost exponentially. I hate to say that, yeah. So she would say, probably logically, and remember how quickly we got there. In other words, you got 3 or 4 minute response time. That's pretty remarkable when you look at it over the full range of service things. Sometimes she says, you got here almost before I hung up the phone. So we generally visit with those engineers, maybe talk about driving a little bit, What's the second thing she says? You got there quick. What was number 2?
Took care of the problem.
Okay, you took care of the problem. That's a great way to say it, yeah. In other words, and she says that you took care of the problem, or I couldn't believe how simple things were after you got here. You all were so calm. I couldn't believe the teamwork. She has 5 or 6 ways that she says that. Her letter is a page and a half long. These are 2 little paragraphs. What's the rest of the letter about?
How well you treated her.
Yeah. How well you treated her. I couldn't believe how nice you were to my family and I. I couldn't believe the extra things you did. In other words, she says it a lot too, just thinking back. I couldn't believe blank, blank, blank. Well, that's on the treatment part of it. Let me ask you all, what parts of that letter was I really trained to read?
Probably from your generation, just the part about that they did everything right and they left. Not really what they did so great after the fire happened, because you're thinking, okay, my guys know what they're doing. When really the most important thing to the customer is the big long paragraph that you don't really even give a thought to until the last 10 or 15 years.
So I was trained, socialized, sort of packaged up with fast and effective. Because if you look at firefighting tactics, it's fast and it's effective. It intervenes, which has to do with speed, compressed time, and it's in the right place at the right time doing the right stuff, which is tactical. See, so when I got that, what did I do? When I got to that in the letter, and I was satisfied that had occurred, what did I do then?
Skim through the rest or didn't even read it?
Absolutely. I stopped reading it. What did I miss?
The most important part of the letter.
Yeah, absolutely. See, not that the other is not critical. It is. That's what got us in the door. She called us because her kitchen is burning. So you want fast and effective as standard service in the beginning. But to her, see, and I don't know why I remember the day that this sort of sunk in. is I got to thinking about what she never said. Not what she said, but what she never said. Have you ever got a letter from a customer that complimented a fire truck? I never did. I love fire trucks. I own a fire truck. I invested $125,000 in it, restoring a fire truck, and raised the value of it to about $12,000. So if you guys need any financial help while I'm here, I'm here for you. See? She never said anything about a fire truck. Oh, Chief Brunacini, I couldn't believe those 1250 triple combination pumps and the lights that you had for the water level in the tank. I was just fascinated by it. And those constant flow nozzles. Oh, they pulled those in my kitchen. It was absolutely thrilling. I didn't know any of that stuff. Well, we've dedicated our lives to that stuff. What is that to her? Transparent. Now, she's a smart person. If you visit with her, you do a focus group with her, she'll say, I was impressed with your equipment. I was impressed with your people. Your people were calm, they were connected, they talked to each other, they were polite to each other. They weren't yelling at each other. It was really interesting to watch you all. So she's a smart person. I'm not being critical of her or disrespectful at all, just the opposite. But see, she's not a fire officer, she's not a fire protection engineer, she's not a fire equipment specialist. She's a grandma or whatever. Smart too in the process. See, what happened the day that I read her whole letter? I guess that's what epiphany. It was an epiphany. And again, let me repeat what I said before. It all kind of flashed back to me to saying, she never wrote about tactics and strategy. She never wrote about command. She never commented on the way we organized it. She didn't compliment us on the incident action plan. She didn't understand any of that. Now, she would have understood it if it was confused in the absence of those things. But there's a lot of things that we do, you do every day. If you're doing incident command, nobody knows it but you. If you want to know whether incident command is being done, watch when you don't do it. But when you do it, everything is push, pull, click, click it. The guy said it almost runs itself, and that's what you're trying to achieve in it. So now what we're talking about is a letter now where I got to start picking out people, pets, pictures, and pills. Let's cook it with pets. How does Mrs. Smith feel about her pets?
Pets are generally considered as part of the family.
Part of the family.
If you can save a pet, you've saved a member of their family, and they're forever grateful.
Absolutely. Please get the cat out. Leave my mother-in-law. Whatever. I'm just kidding. Yeah. Yeah. Pet's a big deal. Huge deal. Yeah. In fact, we had a plan once that we were going to assign a 4-month-old kitten to every engine company. And when the fire, we knew it was out and safe, we'd take the cat in the back, smudge him up a little bit, take him out in the front yard and resuscitate him. We'd be on the cover of USA Today twice a week. Because what do people say? When you see a pet rescue picture, what's the sound they make? Oh. So yeah, that's the sound you want. That's the sound the advertising people want. Because what's the meaning of it? What does mean? When your wife looks at the paper and she says, you hear that sound, what does it mean?
It means they're happy or they're satisfied and something good happened.
What kind of a sound is it?
Loving.
Yeah, see, loving, caring, emotional, yeah. It's not particularly rational. Not that it's irrational, but it's yeah. So if you're going to connect, we're going to connect. Well, let me say it a different way. Let me ask you something. When we see Mrs. Smith on Kitchen Fire Day, what state is she in?
Panic.
Okay, panic. That's a great way to say it. Yeah. What if you take that as a human response? What kind of response is it?
Fear.
Could be fear is a big deal in it. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, fear is a huge deal. But it's basically emotional, isn't it? She's emotional. That's the sound thing. Oh, well, that's an emotional sound that you make. Of saying, look at this, there's a set of conditions here, human, animal, whatever it is, that has touched me emotionally. So now, what language did I speak when we were doing tactics?
Technical.
Technical. That's a great way to say it, yeah. Technical, tactical, hard, fact kind of language, isn't it?
Sure.
Assignment, condition, progress, exception, reassignment. In other words, it's a real rational, tactics is a real rational kind of thing. If I speak to Mrs. Smith that way, what?
She most generally won't understand. She'll be confused and won't get it and is generally less impressed.
So if I want to authentically connect to her and communicate to her, what language do I have to speak?
Her language.
Yeah. See, if I can't speak her language, Swahili talking to an Eskimo. So how do I learn to speak emotionally?
Hallmark?
It's what?
I said Hallmark.
I still didn't understand.
Hallmark, the card company. But
Palmer?
Hallmark.
Oh, Hallmark. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. How does Hallmark speak? I'm sorry. I didn't.
I mean, they connect to people emotionally.
Yeah. That's a great response too. Yeah. So can I study Hallmark?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It sounds kind of funny. Yeah. Is it that I think what somebody described it is that we need to become bilingual. In other words, to be able to speak both the technical language, because that's the way we communicate, but then to be able to understand and be fluent, if you may, in saying, Mrs. Smith is going through an emotional period here with fear and anxiety and panic and all those kinds of things. So if I can't somehow connect to her in a language that she is thinking and feeling and sort of into, I'm not going to effectively connect to her. Now, when you listen to people who study it, and it's their business, in other words, if you listen to mental health professionals, what do they mostly do in the communications process?
They listen.
Yeah, there's a huge credit to listening there, and they connect to her with words and nonverbal communications in a way that connects emotionally. And it's interesting to watch that, and can be educational for us, certainly as students, to see how they do that, because they do it very skillfully, and it's very effective too. Now it's odd because we talk about kind of emergency communications when we're thinking about Mrs. Smith having her kitchen fire. But if you think of being a fire officer, I would submit that most of the communications that you engage in the course of a day or a week or a month is actually a lot more emotional than it is technical. In other words, even as a training officer, if you look at all of the interaction that involves in teaching, learning, doing, practicing, understanding, in other words, the whole educational process is mostly based on emotional connections. That if you can't connect as the instructor with the student and somehow deal with his emotions, that you can get past. If you can't get past his emotions, there's no exchange of information. Now you do that instinctively as a training person. And I don't mean to make that as a real complicated thing. It isn't even something we really think about very much. So if we look at this emotional literacy kind of thing, I think it serves us in a lot of different places. I have been enormously fortunate in so many ways, but one of them is that I live with Mrs. Smith. My wife is Mrs. Smith. So if I want to know what's going on with Mrs. Smith, I just go ask my wife. And I've been married to my first wife, and she says my last, in a week or two here, it's going to be 50 years. So it may last. But it's been an enormous challenge for her to educate me in those 50 years, when I think about it, with just this topic right here. And when I say this, I'm not being facetious, and I mean it with the most thanks to my wife, really and truly, is I am continually asking my wife to translate emotional kinds of things for me. Say, what does this mean emotionally? And she'll tell me what it means. I thank her. I thank you. Okay, I understand at least a little bit more, or a lot more, or whatever. Almost the way my grandkids help me electronically, she helps me with sort of the emotional kind of thing. Now, my challenge in a lot of ways is that I have kind of a natural inclination to try to simplify things. Some tactical areas, that's not a bad thing to do, but there's a lot of human areas that are mostly founded emotionally that you end up being simplistic, not simple. So there, for me, I have to kind of be careful of that. But in other words, I don't think that we should be simplistic in what Mrs. Smith is going through when her kitchen is burning, I guess is the point. But the whole emotional part of this thing is a language sort of a thing and sort of a feeling thing that is interesting and critical to us if we truly are going to put ourselves in the position of that person in the sense of being empathetic. Not so much sympathetic. Probably a natural inclination to be a little sympathetic, there's to feel sorry for people that are going through all the awful stuff that we see. But to be empathetic in a way to say that I'm beginning more and more to be better and better at understanding what this person is going through. In other words, I can contextually connect with this person. And again, not for the sake of being empathetic, but for the sake of providing support to them. And I guess that's just a kind of a human interaction kind of thing, but it certainly becomes accentuated or it's a lot more critical in the situations where you typically see Mrs. Smith. In other words, we see Mrs. Smith at her very worst day with a very worst situation. So how do we more and more effectively connect to that? Again, not to take anything away from the technicals, the tactical part of it. Is Mrs. Smith called us to put her fire out. But what she ends up remembering the longest is what we would call now more and more added value, which is simply the little extra that we do in human terms where we customize that response to fit her needs, again, in some probably extra ways that can range just as simply for us being nice to her, to us doing some things that are really sort of unusual, if you may. We can talk about some of those today. But it kind of breaks down in a way where we can look at what we do in service delivery as sort of a core service. In other words, for us, our core services are fire control, EMS, special operations, public education, environmental protection. In other words, it's a pretty short list. Our menu is like McDonald's. In other words, it doesn't have 85 different things on the menu. We do a pretty limited set of things. So in that process, we could say that for all of those basic core services, there's an opportunity for us to add value. In other words, to do that little extra, and I'll use the word again, if it's customized to fit that situation in the customer in a sensible kind of way. But we know that it's what that customer is going to remember the longest. So for us, if we're sort of marketing ourselves, positioning ourselves, in other words, trying to somehow create a better and better, let me use the word again, position in the community, in the memory and in the history and sort of the stream of consciousness in that community, a lot of it has to do with the folklore that emerges from added value stories. Stories that customers tell about their experience with us in ways where we added value and did those a lot of times really little kinds of extra things. They're not huge kinds of things. Sometimes they're in the memory of those people and in that community almost forever, if you look at it.